George Stephenson, A Symphony of Iron and Steam. Hello. Tonight, we will not rush the pace of daily life. Together, we will step back more than 2 centuries, returning to the air thick with the smell of coal and the heavy moisture of northeast England in the late 18th century. You will find yourself standing in Wylam, a small and impoverished coal mining village in the county of Northumberland, nestled beside the poetic River Tyne, about 9 miles northwest of present-day Newcastle. Here, amidst the steady creaking of wooden wheels grinding against each other and the clip-clop of horse hooves on the dirt road, a legend named George Stephenson began his journey from the shadows of the mines to gradually shine like a destined star of the industrial era. You might find it hard to imagine the life of a boy born in a cramped wattle and daub cottage, where education was a luxury out of reach, and every newborn breath was saturated with black coal dust. You were born into a family where your father was just a poor fireman, covered in soot year-round, and your dear mother was but a quiet woman on the fringes of poverty. Just think about it. You grew up without knowing your letters, without books, without status, and the high society out there seemed to have turned its back on the children of the mining regions before they could even utter their first cry. But it was from that barren land that an iron will germinated, preparing to forge the tracks that would connect the entire world. This is the George Stephenson Biography for Sleep, a gift for your soul at Mind Manor, where great stories are transformed into gentle breaths to guide you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Before lying down comfortably and letting yourself drift with the pulse of steam, remember to hit like and subscribe to the channel if you truly feel that what I share here is lovely and brings you peace. Please leave a comment about where you are listening and what time it is. I will read them all so that kindred spirits can find each other in this vast night, and so I know where your night begins. Now, please turn off unnecessary light sources, turn on a fan for a gentle background hum, and let us drift into tonight's journey together. We return to a night in June 1781, a year when the ill-fated stars seemed to be receding, to make way for the birth of a man who would forever change the face of the entire planet. A year of many upheavals, but also the beginning of one of humanity's greatest revolutions. Part 1. A Hardship Childhood and Working at the Coal Mines. The sound of wind whistling through the gaps in the damp wattle walls was the first sound you heard when you opened your eyes to the world on a day in June 1781. In the small village of Wylam in Northumberland, the air was always thick with the smell of coal and moisture from the nearby River Tyne. You were not born into luxury, nor into an aristocratic family with a long scientific tradition. Your father, Robert Stephenson, affectionately known as Old Bob, was a simple fireman, a man covered in coal dust year-round, who spent his life tending the fires for the massive water-pumping engines at the coal mine. In the cramped room you shared with your parents and 5 siblings, poverty was not an abstract concept. It was the cold that seeped into your skin every winter and the meager meals that were just enough to sustain life. You looked at your father's rough hands, feeling the pulse of an era in transition, but still gripped by the chains of primitivity. Britain at that time stood at a fateful threshold. While distant wars were shaking the colonies, a quiet revolution was taking shape right at home in the dark mines. However, that development seemed to be losing breath. Goods, food, and especially coal, the lifeblood of industry, still relied on the pull of weary horses or slow barges on canals. The economy at this time was like an entity throttled by friction and distance. Everything moved slowly, expensively, and was riddled with physical barriers. You, George Stephenson, were the seeds sown in that barren land, where education was a luxury and a child's future was often decided from their first breath in the dust-filled mine air. Without formal engineering training, without university education, without wealthy backers, you began your journey from absolute zero, with only a curiosity that would never be extinguished. Feel the chill of the earthen floor beneath your feet as you step out of your family's wattle cottage. Right by the porch, less than 2 meters away, was the Wylam Wagonway. This was your world. Every day you witnessed horse-drawn teams pulling heavy coal wagons past, the sound of wood grinding on wood, creating a steady creaking like the heartbeat of this land. The clip-clop of horse hooves on the dirt road and the shouts of the carters blended, forming a symphony of grueling labor. You stood there, a small boy with bright eyes, staring at the turning wheels. The cutting edge of transport technology, and it was literally your backyard. You wondered, could those wooden rails withstand greater weight? Would those horses ever grow tired? Those first questions of your life were the very first seeds of a revolution that would later change the entire map of the world. When you were 8 years old, an age when children of the upper class were beginning their first Latin lessons in prestigious schools, you had to step into the fields to begin a life of labor. Your first job was not to hold a pen, but to hold a stick, herding cows for a neighboring widow. Your task seemed simple. Keep the cows from wandering onto the wooden tracks and close the gates after the coal wagons passed. 10 hours a day, you walked along the worn wooden beams, feeling the scent of wet grass and coal dust mingling in the wind. For 2 pence a day, you brought home to your mother coins soaked in sweat in exchange for minimal loaves of bread. Yet, in the rare moments of free time while the cows were busy grazing, you did not rest. You sat down by the stream, using your small hands to mold blocks of clay taken from the earth. Those blocks of clay, under your hands, gradually turned into miniature models of steam engines. You tried to recreate the shape of the giant pumping engine that your father was still operating at the mine. You used small twigs for pipes and pieces of wood for pistons. In your young mind, questions constantly surfaced like an obsession. How did they work? Why were they designed this way? Could they be better? You observed how the winch gears operated, how the pulleys transmitted force, and you felt a strange connection to the world of machines. To you, iron and steam seemed to have a soul of their own, and you yearned to speak to them in the language of understanding. This curiosity did not come from books. It arose from the meticulous observation of what was happening before your eyes every day. Time passed, and your career became tied to the darkness of the mines. At age 10, you were no longer herding cows, but moved to driving the horses that pulled the coal wagons. You felt the weight of tons of coal behind you, the resistance of friction that the horses had to struggle against. Then, you officially became a picker at the mouth of the mine shaft. Your job was to sit for hours, using your hands to pick out stones, shale, and impurities from the piles of black coal. Coal dust clung to your skin, your lungs, and turned your clothes a permanent shade of gray. Yet, in that grime, you learned how to distinguish each type of mineral, learning the value of meticulousness. You did not complain about the hardship, for you understood that every small task was a piece of a larger system operating to feed Britain. By the age of 14, you received an important promotion, becoming an assistant fireman, working directly under your father. Now, you were no longer standing outside observing. You had entered the heart of the machine. Your job was to constantly shovel coal into the fiery belly of the boiler, maintaining the pressure so the pump could suck water out of the mine. You stood there, amidst the sweltering heat and the roar of steam, sweat pouring down your forehead. You felt the terrifying power of thermal energy as it was converted into mechanical energy. However, you also noticed its primitivity and inefficiency. These machines frequently broke down, wasted energy, and were sometimes extremely dangerous. Instead of fear, you felt attracted. After each 2-hour shift, when other workers rushed home to rest, you often chose to stay alone in the dim light of the coal mine. You dismantled the mechanical parts once they had cooled down. You touched every piston, every discharge valve, studying how they fitted together. You learned about machinery through touch and instinct, a type of practical knowledge forged from direct experience that no university could teach. This was the sharp contrast between you and the elite engineers of the age, those who could solve complex equations on paper, but were stuck when faced with a jammed valve. To you, the pumping engine was not just a tool. It was a friend that needed care and understanding. You became a self-taught expert, someone who could hear an unusual sound in the engine and know immediately where the problem lay. This expertise made you a respected name among the mechanics at the Water Row mine in Newbern by the time you turned 17. There, you were entrusted with the responsibility of being the engine man, a position requiring extreme focus and steady nerves. You sat at the control platform, operating the winch gear system to lower miners hundreds of meters into the earth and bring them up safely at the end of the day. The lives of dozens of people were in your hands, depending on how you handled the levers and brakes. The rapid promotion of a young man was met with envy and skepticism from veteran miners, who believed you were too green to handle the job. A large man publicly challenged your ability, leading to a fist fight right at the coal yard. You did not back down. With strength forged from years of shoveling coal and a toned body, you will not only through physical strength, but also through composure. After that battle, no one dared to doubt your honor or mettle again. Yet, even after mastering the most complex machines of the Northumberland region, you realized you were imprisoned in another kind of darkness: illiteracy. In 1798, when you were 17 years old, you still could not read a headline in the newspapers reporting on Napoleon's conquests in Europe. You heard others talk about the world's upheavals, about new scientific theories, but it was all out of your reach. You yearned to access the treasury of knowledge stored in technical textbooks. You understood that without literacy, your intellect would forever be limited to what your eyes could see and your hands could touch. The truth that knowledge is power began to echo in your mind like a rallying cry. You decided that no matter how late it was, you had to break the chains of illiteracy. You began to seek out night classes where dim candlelight illuminated unfamiliar alphabets. Imagine the scene. You, a grown man with heavily calloused hands and clothes stained with coal dust, huddled on small wooden benches next to children half your age. You felt no shame. The hunger for knowledge overwhelmed all personal complexes. You took the meager wages from your work as an engine man to pay the fees for the village teachers. Here, you began the journey of conquering the most basic things. He learned reading, he learned writing, and he learned arithmetic. Letter by letter, calculation by calculation, you persevered in piecing them together, just as you would assemble an engine. You soon realized you had a special talent for numbers. Although the abstract mathematical theories of the elite seemed distant, practical math came to you as naturally as breathing. You had spent years mentally calculating loads, pressure, and coal consumption, so translating them into numbers on paper was not overly difficult. You learned math not for exams, but to solve the real-world problems of life and mechanics. Every night, after a long, tiring day at the mine, you walked through dark roads to reach the classroom, carrying an intense desire to rise above your preordained fate. Knowledge began to light the path ahead, transforming an ordinary mechanic into a potential inventor, someone ready to challenge both space and time. You left the night class when the moon was high, feeling the biting cold of the Northumberland air seep through your thin coat. The smell of coal smoke from distant chimneys still wafted in the wind, but now your mind was no longer just occupied with piles of black coal. Letters and numbers were dancing in your head, creating images of a future where human power was no longer limited by muscle. You walked on the familiar dirt road, the clip-clop of a late coal wagon team still echoing behind you, reminding you of the reality of an economy still groaning under the stagnation of friction. You clenched your hands, feeling the warmth of new understanding blossoming within, ready for longer strides into the world of engineering and the coming revolutions. You stepped through the old wooden gate of the coal mine. The darkness of the night seemed pushed back by the light from the furnaces still smoldering. The steady thumping of the water pump in the still night guided you back to the small house, where the warmth of family awaited amidst the many worries. Part 2. Night School and Technical Advancements. The pungent scent of ink mingling with the smell of half-burnt candle wax in a cramped classroom is what you feel most clearly as you take your first steps into the world of knowledge. In 1799, as the shadows of the Napoleonic Wars loomed over Europe and news of bloody battles constantly reached the mining regions, you realized that you could not forever stand on the sidelines of history. You yearned to read the headlines of the local newspaper yourself, to decode the complex technical diagrams of the steam engines that were the very soul of the mines. At age 18, while other miners sought the tavern to drown their sorrows after a tiring shift, you chose the path to night school. Your hands, accustomed to operating massive levers and shoveling tons of coal, now struggled to hold a tiny quill pen. You felt out of place, a grown man with bulging muscles sitting among children just beginning to learn their letters. Yet, that humiliation was nothing compared to the thirst for knowledge burning in your heart. You wondered, could these letters open the door to a larger world? Could these calculations help you understand the pulse of steam more accurately? You persevered in spending your meager wages, money your family desperately needed for food and essentials to pay for tuition. Every night, after 12 hours of working underground, when your whole body was covered in coal dust and you were exhausted, you walked through dark trails to reach the class. He learned reading, he learned writing, and he learned arithmetic. The repetition of basic lessons did not discourage you. Instead, it became a new rhythm in your life. In particular, arithmetic came to you like a long-lost friend. Numbers were not foreign, for during all those years of operating machinery, you had unconsciously calculated loads, pressure, and fuel consumption. Now, those calculations were systematized, becoming a sharp language for you to communicate with the mechanical world. Although abstract theories like calculus remained out of reach, practical mathematics became a powerful tool for you to begin sketching improvements in your mind. You understood that knowledge was not just light, but also a weapon to break the barriers of the lower working class. In 1801, your educational efforts began to bear fruit when you were transferred to Black Collarton Colliery as a brakesman. This was a position requiring sharp intuition and a deep understanding of the operating mechanism of the winch gear system. You sat on a high platform, hands gripping the control levers, feeling the slightest vibration of the cable as it moved miners and coal wagons up and down the shaft. Your innate curiosity was now supported by the ability to calculate, making you not merely an operator, but a refined observer. During machine downtime, you never allowed yourself to truly rest. You dismantled the steam engine parts, cleaned every valve, and checked every joint. You asked yourself countless questions. Why does this piston wear out faster than that one? What would happen if we changed the angle of the gear? You learned from the breakdowns, from the grease on your hands, and accumulated a treasury of practical experience that no book could fully convey. This sharpness gradually transformed you from an ordinary operator into a renowned mechanical expert in the region. Amidst the dry, rhythmic beats of machinery, your heart began to flutter with love. You remember the afternoons sneaking into the orchard of Elizabeth Hindmarsh's father, the girl you often called Betty. In the quiet space of the Black Collarton countryside, the scent of apple blossoms and Betty's laughter seemed to make you forget the sweltering heat of the boiler. However, the harsh reality of society at that time quickly extinguished that flame of love. Betty's father, a farmer with some means, flatly rejected you. His words were like a knife cutting into your self-esteem. George was just a poor miner of low birth and without formal education, not at all a suitable husband. The sharp contrast between your aspirations and social prejudice was clearer than ever. You felt the bitterness of being judged not on talent or character, but on bank balances and family origins. That pain did not break you. It only thickened your determination to prove your own worth. After being rejected, you turned your attention to the Henderson family, where you were lodgers to save costs. Although initially rejected by your younger sister Anne, you found harmony with Frances Henderson, also known as Fanny, a woman 9 years your senior with a kind and patient soul. On the 28th of November 1802, at Newburn Church, you took Fanny's gentle hands, promising a future that, though difficult, would be full of devotion. You moved to Willington Quay, living in a cramped, rented room where the only warmth came from love and shared ambitions. Here, you continued your work as a brakesman at the Ballast Hill, a repetitive but responsible job. To make ends meet and have extra money for mechanical experiments, you turned yourself into a man who never slept. At night, under the flickering oil lamp, you made shoes, repaired clocks for neighbors, and even cut dress patterns for the wives of other miners. You saw yourself as a multi-purpose machine, working tirelessly to build a foundation for your small family. Happiness seemed more complete when, in 1803, your son Robert Stephenson was born. You held the tiny child in your arms, feeling his gentle breath, and promising yourself, Robert will not have to live a life as grimy as his father's. You wanted Robert to go to school, to access the most academic knowledge, so that later he could stand equal to the best engineers in Britain. Your son was the motivation for you to work harder, to believe that all current hardships were meaningful. In 1804, your family moved to Westmore, near the Killingworth mine, a place promising more opportunities. However, fate once again tested your mettle with ultimate losses. Your infant daughter, Fanny, died after only a few weeks, leaving a vast void in the small house. Before the pain could subside, the cruel disease of consumption began to eat away at Fanny's health. You watched your dear wife grow thin and frail, heard the heartbreaking dry coughs, and saw the bloodstains on her handkerchief. Although you spent all your extra money to hire a doctor, In an era where medicine was primitive, you could only helplessly watch her leave the world in 1806. At age 25, you became a widower, alone with a 3-year-old son amidst a freezing Northumberland winter. Despair at times wanted to drown you, but the will of a mechanic did not allow you to give up. For Robert's future, you made a painful decision, sending your son to be cared for by a local woman and walking hundreds of miles alone to Montrose, Scotland, to find work at a spinning mill. The journey was long, your legs were weary, but your mind was incredibly alert. In Scotland, you were exposed to the most advanced steam engines of James Watt. You observed how the drive mechanisms were exquisitely designed and learned how to regulate steam effectively. You even thought of emigrating to America to seek a new beginning, a place where birth was no longer a shackle. But that dream had to be set aside because poverty pursued you relentlessly. You did not have enough money to buy a ticket for an ocean-crossing ship. You realized that, wherever you were, talent and perseverance remained your only assets. Just as you were beginning to settle into life in Scotland, tragic news from home arrived. A steam valve explosion at the mine had permanently blinded your father. Old Bob, the man who spent his life lighting the fires for machinery, now had to live in eternal darkness. Without a penny in savings or a pension, your father was at risk of being cast onto the streets. Immediately, you left everything to return to Westmore. You used all the money saved from Scotland to pay off your father's debts and brought him to live with you and Robert. Your sister Nellie also moved in to help you care for the family. Now, on the shoulders of Aberkemen was the burden of supporting a family of 4, including a disabled father and a young child. Yet, in those darkest days, the contrast between the hardship of reality and the brilliance of the ideas in your head was clearer than ever. You stayed up reading by lamplight every night, sketching machine diagrams on any scrap of paper you could find, turning the small house into a laboratory of dreams. 1811 became a golden milestone in your life. At the High Pit in Killingworth, a Newcomen-style steam pumping engine had broken down severely, causing water to flood the mine shafts and all mining activities to cease. The mine owners had invited many prestigious engineers from all over, men who brought countless degrees and books, but all failed to revive the machine. The deadlock lasted for weeks, causing thousands of pounds in damage. It was then that you, a widowed brakesman, often looked down upon, stepped forward and offered to repair it. You looked at the giant machine lying motionless, felt the lingering warmth in the pipes, and heard the whisper of the jammed gears. Through practical intuition, you quickly identified the flaw in the valve system design and the imbalance in steam pressure. In just a few days, under your magic touch, the machine began to groan and then roared powerfully. The floodwater was sucked clear from the shaft, to the amazement of everyone. The victory at High Pit was not just a technical success. It was a defiant affirmation of the power of self-taught knowledge and practical experience over the textbook theories of the elite. The Grand Allies, who owned the largest mines in the region, could no longer ignore your talent. They appointed you as the engine wright for all the Killingworth collieries, with a salary of £100 per year, a massive sum compared to your origins. Now, you no longer have to worry about daily bread for your father and son. More importantly, you had the power and resources in your hands to realize your boldest ideas. You began to think of something grander than a water pump, a steam engine that could move on rails, a creature of iron and steel that could replace horsepower and completely change how humans conquer space. You stand beside the pumping engine operating smoothly at High Pit, feeling the blast of hot steam on your face and the steady, rhythmic thumping like a promise of the future. The sunset falls over the coal fields of Killingworth, dyeing the old wooden rails that stretch to the horizon a bright red. You gently touch the still hot steel casing of the engine, already imagining the iron wheels that will soon roll on this path, carrying the aspiration of a miner who wants to lift the whole world upon the shoulders of steam. Darkness falls over the mine passages as the miners begin their night shift, leaving only the flickering light from oil lamps hanging on the damp rock walls to guide their way home. Part 3. Invention of the Blucher locomotive and the miner's safety lamp. The weight of 10 banknotes worth 100 pounds sits firmly in the palm of your hand, carrying a sense of both reality and immense pride. In 1812, as you turned 31, the world around you at Killingworth Colliery changed completely. After the resounding victory at High Pit, where you revived the steam-pumping engine that had baffled the most illustrious engineers, the powerful Grand Allies no longer doubted your talent. You were officially appointed as the engineer for the entire system of mines in the region. Now, you no longer have to worry about whether tomorrow's meal will be enough for your father and your son, Robert. You stand amidst vast mechanical workshops, surrounded by the sound of hammers striking iron anvils and the hiss of steam, feeling like a captain holding the soul of an entire industrial region. This position grants you ultimate power over every gear, every piston, and every boiler. But more importantly, it gives you the resources to realize dreams much grander than simply keeping mines from flooding. Your life has now found a peaceful harbor at Dial Cottage, a small cottage on Lime Road in Westmore. You watch your son Robert growing day by day, and in your mind, a meticulous educational plan has been mapped out. You do not want Robert to experience the bitter years of illiteracy like yourself, nor do you want his hands to be stained with coal dust for a lifetime due to a lack of knowledge. You use a large portion of your generous salary to send Robert to a prestigious private school in Newcastle. The image of young Robert every morning, riding the donkey you specifically bought to ease his 10-mile commute, becomes your silent pride. Every evening, under the oil lamp at Dial Cottage, a delightful reversal takes place. Your son becomes the teacher, conveying the academic, mathematical, and scientific theories he has learned, while you listen and transform them into practical applications in your head. You and your son together hand-built a sundial mounted on the porch, a symbol of precision and the connection between two generations of engineers. That clock does not just measure time, it measures the extraordinary ascent of a mining family toward the light of knowledge. However, family happiness does not make you forget the concern over an economy throttled by friction and distance. You stand beside the old wooden rails, watching tired horses straining to pull heavy coal wagons toward the River Tyne. The cost of feeding and maintaining horsepower is too great, while the transport speed is far too slow. You know that out there, predecessors like Richard Trevithick or John Blenkinsop have tried to build traveling engines, but they seem to be only expensive toys. So heavy that they crush the brittle cast iron rails and frequently break down. You feel the breath of a new era wanting to escape the chest of Mother Earth, and you believe you are the one who can forge the keys to release it. You do not need complex designs on parchment from the elite. You need the true power of steam harnessed by practical understanding. In 1813, upon hearing news of locomotive experiments at Wylam Colliery, your will burns more fiercely than ever. You directly meet the Killingworth mind management, using all your confidence and sharp arguments to persuade them to fund your own steam locomotive project. You pledge that your machine will not just be an experiment, but a true economic solution. Upon receiving approval, you begin turning the small workshop behind Dial Cottage into a battlefield of creativity. The sound of the forge rings out incessantly day and night with the help of blacksmith John Thorswall. You feel the heat from the furnace on your face, smell the red-hot iron and the heavy scent of grease. Without precision machining tools, every part of the locomotive is hand-forged, much like making a giant horseshoe. Every piston, every crankshaft is formed from your decisive hammer blows and extreme meticulousness. After 10 months of hard labor, in 1814 a creature of iron and steel takes shape before your eyes. You name it Blücher, after the Prussian general Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, who brought hope to Europe in the war against Napoleon. That name represents speed, power, and the turning of fate. Blücher is not just a machine, it is the embodiment of everything you learned from years of observing steam pumps. You have boldly discarded the complex and cumbersome gear systems previously believed necessary for traction. Instead, you place your trust in pure friction between flanged wheels and the smooth iron rail surface, a principle that engineers of that time still doubted. You feel the pulse of steam inside Blücher's boiler, ready for a trial that will redefine your entire career. On the 25th of July, 1814, the entire Killingworth region seems to hold its breath as Blücher is brought out to the Collingwood Railway. You stand on the control platform, hands gripping the steam lever, feeling the intense vibration of the machine beneath your feet. The rhythmic thumping begins, and to the crowd's amazement, Blücher starts to move, pulling 8 wagons filled with 30 tons of coal. Although the speed reaches only 4 miles per hour, slower than a fast walker, that power is a revolution. You have proven that a flanged wheel adhesion locomotive is entirely feasible. The sight of iron wheels rolling steadily on rails without the need for rack gears marks the end of animal traction dominance. You see amazement in the eyes of the miners, and in your heart, you know that the circulatory system of industrial Britain has begun its first beats. Yet, Blücher is still far from perfection. It is as noisy as an angry monster, consumes too much fuel, and its massive weight continuously breaks the brittle cast iron rails. You are not discouraged by criticisms that its operating costs still equal horsepower. In the following years, you dismantle Blücher, reuse every piece of metal, and build a total of 16 different locomotives. Each one born after carries improvements from the failures of the one before. In 1815, you and Ralph Dodds patented a new transmission system using a ball and socket joint to transmit power more smoothly to the wheels. You also realize that the track and the locomotive are two inseparable entities. You collaborate with William Losch to create stronger cast iron rails, creating a solid foundation for your steam giants to stride upon. Amidst your passion for locomotives, another shadow falls over your life: horrific explosions in the mines. The disaster at Felling Colliery in 1812, which claimed 92 lives, remains a painful scar in your mind. You smell the scent of death, of grief enveloping the mining villages as bodies blackened by the fire are brought up from the earth. The cause is fire damp meeting the naked flames from miners' lamps. You feel a responsibility to do something. When the Royal Society announces a competition to create a safety lamp, you do not need a fancy laboratory in London. You use Dial Cottage itself and the simplest materials to conduct daring experiments in the middle of the night. You believe in empirical over theoretical, believing in what your own eyes witness deep in the shafts. You have built a lamp that operates on a sophisticated principle of airflow regulation. You realize that if the amount of gas entering the lamp exceeds safe levels, the flame will automatically extinguish instead of causing an explosion. To prove your design, you make a decision many call insane. You take the prototype lamp deep into one of the most dangerous areas of Killingworth Mine, where gas is leaking heavily from rock crevices. You stand there, in the pitch darkness and thick moisture, courageously holding the lamp directly into the flammable gas stream. Two colleagues standing beside you tremble with fear, but you remain as still as an iron statue. The flame in the lamp flares up slightly, then subsides. No explosion occurs. The Geordie lamp was born from your very wager of life, bringing safe light to thousands of miners working day and night in the earth. However, your joy of creation is soon doused by the arrogance of the elite. In London, Sir Humphrey Davy, an illustrious scientist with countless degrees, also announces a similar lamp model. The authorities and scholars in the capital immediately accuse you of being a thief of ideas. They cannot believe that a poorly educated miner, speaking with a thick Northumbrian accent, could be ahead of a knight of the Royal Society. You feel the bitter humiliation when Davy receives £2,000 in prize money, while you are only granted a small sum. The contrast between the luxurious meeting rooms in London and the dusty mine shafts, where you sacrificed your safety to test the lamp, is clearer than ever. The accusation of being a thief cuts deep into your self-esteem, creating a wound toward the formal academic world that you will carry for life. Fortunately, your fellow countrymen in the Northeast do not abandon you. They formed an independent inquiry committee in Newcastle to find justice. When you stand before the committee, you do not use flowery language. You only present factual data and indisputable timelines. The principles upon which a safety lamp might be constructed, I stated to several persons long before Sir Humphrey Davy came into this part of the country. The truth finally triumphs. You are vindicated and receive a reward of £1,000 from the miners and mine owners of Northumberland. Even so, the feud with Davy becomes a symbol of the class struggle in science at that time. While Davy's lamp is popular in the South, in your homeland, the miners insist on using only the Geordie lamp because they trust the hands and intellect of one of their own. The period of 1818 to 1819 marks your great transition from a coal mine mechanic to a true civil engineer. The fame of your perseverance and inventions has spread far beyond the boundaries of Killingworth. You receive a contract to build the Hetton Railway connecting Hetton Colliery to Sunderland, 8 miles long. You envision a route where animal traction is eliminated, replaced by a perfect coordination between gravity and the most powerful steam locomotives. This will be the first railway in the world operated entirely by machinery, a testament to your aspiration to conquer space. You are no longer the cow-herding boy of the past. You have become an architect of the future, preparing to lay the first bricks for a world of limitless mobility. You stand on the hilltop looking towards Sunderland, feeling the sea breeze carrying the saltiness of the ocean. Beneath your feet, new rails are being laid, shimmering in the evening sun like silver ribbons, leading into a new era. The sound of construction hammers echoes from afar, blending with the sound of crashing waves, creating a hurried rhythm of creation. You smile, feeling the shift of time. ready for the greater challenges awaiting on the horizon, where even grander railways are about to be formed. The Geordie lamps begin to be lit along the passages into the mine shafts as night falls, creating small but resilient spots of light amidst the dark earth to guide your way home. Part 4. The Hetton Railway and the Robert Locomotive Company. You feel the chill of the Northumberland morning mist seeping through your coat as you stand on the hilltop looking down at the valley leading towards Sunderland. In your hand is the topographic map of the Hetton Railway, an 8-mile project that the mine owners entrusted to you in 1820. These were no longer short tracks within the confines of a single mine. This was a challenge of scale and mechanical coordination without precedent. You look at the steep slopes and the long stretches of level ground, your mind beginning to sketch a symphony of power. You do not just want to transport coal, you want to create a self-operating system, a mechanical entity that does not need the breath of horses or the strength of human muscle. You wonder, are these 8 miles the first steps of a network that will cover the planet? Those questions do not frighten you. They only further ignite your desire to conquer the terrain with your practical intellect. Instead of choosing a single solution, you designed a masterful mechanical combination. You utilized the very gravity of the earth to push wagons downhill, used stationary engines to pull them up the hills with cables, and deployed traveling locomotives on the level sections. Every part of the Hetton line bore the mark of meticulous calculation. In 1822, when the line officially opened, the world was stunned. Every ton of coal moving across those 8 miles was powered entirely by machines. The clinking of the hauling chains mingled with the hiss of the locomotive steam, creating a new rhythm for the industrial age. You stood there, watching the trains move continuously like a stream of black blood feeding the port of Sunderland, and realized you had officially become a civil engineer. The success of Hetton was not just a technical victory. It was a manifesto that the era of animal traction had truly come to an end. Your reputation began to spread, like the smoke from a steam engine. In 1821, when the British Parliament passed the Stockton and Darlington Railway, S&DR, a fateful meeting took place. You went to meet Edward Pease, a wealthy and visionary Quaker businessman in Darlington on April 19. In Pease's quiet office, you used your thick Northumbrian accent but persuasive voice to challenge his original plan to use horse-drawn carriages. You addressed his doubts not with flowery theories, but with factual data from the Killingworth mine. A locomotive is worth 50 horses. That assertion completely changed the project's trajectory. Pease saw in you an integrity and a rare capability, and he entrusted you with the responsibility of chief engineer. This was the moment you realized that to change the world, you did not just need machines, you needed powerful economic alliances. Throughout the survey of this 5-mile route, you were no longer alone. Beside you was Robert, your son, now 18 years old, who carried within him the perfect blend of your practical blood and the academic mathematical knowledge you had saved every penny of your wages to provide for him. Father and son walked together through fields, marshes, and forests, carrying measuring tapes and calculation sheets. You showed Robert how to read the language of the land, how to identify the ideal gradient for a heavy locomotive, while Robert helped you systematize those observations into precise technical drawings. This father-son collaboration was not just a passing on of a trade, but a merging of two eras. You saw yourself in Robert, but a more complete version, no longer held back by the barriers of illiteracy. Every step the two of you took on the Stockton and Darlington route was laying the foundation for a future of limitless mobility. One of the decisions that most clearly showed your character was the choice of rail material. You held the patent for cast iron rails, a material that, if used for the entire line, would have brought you a massive personal profit from royalties. Yet, you were also the one who best understood their fragility under the weight of the new generation of steam locomotives. You had witnessed cast iron rails snap like dry twigs, threatening the safety of the entire system. Faced with the temptation of money, you chose integrity. You firmly requested that Edward Pease use the more durable wrought iron rails of John Birkinshaw, even though it meant personally giving up your financial share. I cannot let my reputation and human safety be destroyed by brittle iron. This contrast between personal greed and professional ethics defined your reputation as a symbol of reliability in the industrial world. And then, another seemingly small decision of yours accidentally became the genetic code for the entire global transportation system: the setting of the gauge. Based on practical observations of traditional horse-drawn wagons and operating experience at the coal mines, you found the distance of 4 feet 8 inches to be the most logical figure for stability. However, when running the locomotive through curves, you discovered a slight resistance due to the confinement of space. Without needing complex mathematical equations, you used the instinct of a mechanic to widen the distance by 1/4 of an inch on each side. The figure of 4 feet 8.5 inches was born from that. Did you ever think that a small empirical adjustment in dusty workshops would become the standard gauge for 60% of the railway networks worldwide? The distance between those two rails is your invisible but greatest legacy, a testament to the power of practical thinking rising above all academic theories. In 1823, you realized that to realize this revolution, you needed a stable and quality supply of locomotives. No company in the world at that time manufactured locomotives for commercial purposes. You decided to risk it once more by establishing Robert Stephenson and Company at 4th Street, Newcastle. Although you were the initiator, you named the company after your son and appointed Robert as the managing director when he was only 20. You wanted to build an empire based not just on your name, but on the future. At the 4th Street Works, the sound of hammers and the heat of the forge rang out again, but this time to build the historic locomotion, originally active. You stood among your workers, smelling grease and steel, feeling the pulse of a new industry taking shape under the hands of you and your son. Amidst the busyness of work, your personal life also found gentle notes. In 1820, you married for the second time to Elizabeth Hindmarsh, the very Betty you had once loved dearly and been rejected by years ago when you were a poor miner. Now, as a renowned engineer with an income of hundreds of pounds, her father had no reason to stop it. This marriage provided you with a solid foundation, a peaceful home to return to after long survey trips. Betty was not just a wife. She was the family manager, supporting your ambitions with patience and understanding. You felt fate compensating you for the years of loneliness and loss. Family happiness was the cool stream of water nourishing your will to face the political storms and the opposition from the elite awaiting you. However, in 1824, a major interruption occurred. Robert accepted an invitation to South America to manage mining operations in Colombia for 3 years. You saw your son off at the port with deep sadness in your heart. Robert's absence was not just a father's longing, but the loss of your most capable partner. you found yourself suddenly alone before technical drawings and the treacherous debates at the London Parliament. Lacking Robert's mathematical ability and sophistication in presentation, you began to feel the barriers of your old education returning to surround you. Errors in estimates and ridicule from theoretical experts began to appear. You knew that a stormy period was coming, where you had to defend your vision not just with hammers and steel, but with the mettle of a man who had once herded cows to rise as the father of railways. You walk on the newly installed wrought iron rails of the Stockton line, feeling their solid grip beneath your boot soles. The winds from the River Tees carry moisture and cold, but in your mind, ideas for a further journey to Liverpool and Manchester have already begun to spark. The thumping of the rails beneath your feet rings out steadily, like a reminder that although Robert has gone far away, the legacy that father and son are building together is still unceasingly moving forward. Darkness envelops the workshop at 4th Street as the last blacksmiths finish their shift, leaving only the red glow from the coal furnaces still smoldering to guide your way home. Part 5. Opening the Stockton line and setting the rail standard. The warmth from the cooling forge radiates against your face as you stand in the middle of the 4th Street workshop, gazing at the perfect mechanical lines of the machine named Active. This is more than just a heavy mass of iron and steel. It is the distillation of all the sleepless nights at Dial Cottage, the result of heated debates with Edward Pease, and the hope for a world no longer divided by the weary steps of horses. You touch the cold steel casing, feeling the potential pulse of the steam within a power waiting to be unleashed to forever change the course of history. 1825 is not just a number on a calendar. It is the starting point of an era where humans will conquer space and time through their own intellect and perseverance. You wonder, do the people waiting out there understand that they are about to witness a technological miracle? Do they know that the first train whistle will be the bell signaling the end of an old and slow world? The Stockton and Darlington project began simply as a dream of merchants wanting to transport coal more cheaply and faster from Bishop Auckland to the River Tees. You recall the fateful meeting with Edward Pease in 1821, when he still believed that horsepower was the only solution for this 2 5-mile route. In the quiet room at Darlington, you did not use flowery drawings to persuade him, but your own deep understanding of steam and iron. You told him, a locomotive is worth 50 horses. The contrast between the image of frail horses, vulnerable to the weather, and an iron machine that could work day and night tirelessly, completely changed. Pease completely changed his view. It was not just a business decision. It was a historical turning point when a public railway was designed for the first time to be operated entirely by steam locomotives. You feel a surge of pride realizing that, from your own practical observations at the Killingworth mine, you are reshaping the infrastructure of an entire nation. The collaboration between you and your son Robert during the route survey phase is one of your most beautiful memories. You look at Robert, now an 18-year-old youth with sharp eyes, carefully measuring every curve and calculating the gradients of the line. While you made decisions based on mechanical intuition and hard-earned experience, Robert systematized them with complex theoretical mathematical calculations that you sacrificed so much for him to learn. You and your son were like two perfect puzzle pieces. One side the power of practice, the other the precision of academic science. Realizing that no company could provide locomotives of sufficient standard for the project, you, Pease, and Robert founded Robert Stephenson and Company in Newcastle. You entrusted your son with the responsibility of managing director at the age of 20, an act of absolute trust in the next generation. At 4th Street, the sound of hammers striking wrought iron rang out like a symphony of creation, where the world's first commercial locomotive was gradually taking shape under the supervision of father and son. During construction, you faced a grueling choice regarding technical ethics. You held the patent for improved cast iron rails, a design that could have brought you immense wealth from royalties if applied to the entire 25 miles of track. Yet, the conscience of a mechanic would not allow you to do it. You knew that cast iron was brittle and prone to cracking under the massive weight of the new generation of steam locomotives, a risk that could lead to disaster. You had seen the superiority of wrought iron from John Birkenshaw's Bedlington works. They were tougher, could be made longer, and were much safer. You firmly chose wrought iron for the entire project, accepting a major personal financial loss. I prioritized the safety and efficiency of the system over my own profit. This integrity was a sharp contrast to the financiers of the time, who often put profit above all else. You understood that an engineer's reputation is built on the stability of the rails, not on the pounds in his pocket. By September 1825, the machine Locomotion Number 1 was complete, ready for the historic opening day. You changed its name from Active to Locomotion to affirm its core mission, to create movement. Alongside Locomotion, other machines like Hope, Diligence, and Black Diamond were also taking shape, forming a powerful steam army. You stand in the cab of Locomotion, smelling the grease mingling with the scent of coal, feeling the heat from the boiler radiating like the breath of a living creature. This is the moment when all the doubts and ridicule of the London academic world will have to fall silent before the obvious truth of iron and steel. On the 27th of September, 1825, the entire northeast of England seemed to vibrate with excitement. Thousands of people flocked along the route from Darlington to Stockton to witness what they considered a miracle. You saw a man on horseback leading the train, carrying a flag with the words, Periculum Privatum Utilitas Publica. It was a reminder of the sacrifice and courage required to create innovation. You personally placed your hand on the controls, opening the throttle slowly. A powerful rhythmic thumping echoed, and the 80-ton train began to move. Behind you were not just wagons carrying coal and flour, but the special passenger carriage named Experiment, where dignitaries sat with a mixture of wonder and fear. 600 people were accompanying you on this world-changing journey. As the train crossed the 9-mile distance in less than 2 hours, you felt the extraordinary mechanical power working beneath your feet. On the straight sections, you pushed the speed up to 24 miles per hour, an unthinkable velocity in an era when horse carriages only achieved a third of that. The cheers of the crowds along the road mingled with the roar of the locomotive to create a moment of ultimate triumph. You had proven that steam railways were not only feasible but absolutely profitable. The ability to transport hundreds of people and tons of goods at such speed shattered all prejudices about the slowness of machinery. You saw the astonished eyes of journalists and engineers, and you knew that, from this day forward, the map of Britain would be redrawn with iron rails. During the construction of this line, you made a globally defining decision that initially seemed like only a minor technical adjustment, setting the Stephenson gauge. You began with a dimension of 4 feet 8 inches, based on the traditional width of horse-drawn wagons at the coal mines, a size that had existed since ancient times to fit the bodies of horses. However, through practical trials, you noticed a mechanical issue. The locomotive wheels often bind slightly when passing through sharp curves. Instead of sitting down to calculate complex academic mathematical equations, you used the very sharpness of a mechanic to widen each side by 1/4 of an inch. The figure of 4 feet 8.5 inches was born from that, a practical solution to reduce friction and increase the smoothness of the train. Who would have thought that 1/2 inch of space would become the greatest standard of world infrastructure? You established a genetic code for transportation that, 2 centuries later, about 60% of the railway networks across the entire planet still follow. The contrast between your simple solution and the later complex arguments of engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel regarding a 7-foot wide gauge showed your far-reaching vision. You were not just designing for a single line. You were creating a common language so that networks could easily connect. The victory of the Stephenson Standard was the victory of practicality and network connectivity values you had internalized from your days working in the dark mine shafts. The resounding success of the Stockton and Darlington line pushed you into the heart of a budding railway mania. Immediately, you were invited into the most ambitious project of the time, connecting the Port of Liverpool with the textile center of Manchester. This was a massive economic puzzle aimed at breaking the monopoly of the slow and expensive canal systems. In 1825, when you submitted your plans to the Parliamentary Committee in London, you faced another harsh reality: the opposition of the elite and the canal tycoons. They viewed you as an uneducated outsider threatening their interests. In the stifling room of Parliament, under the contemptuous gaze of lawyers like Edward Hall Alderson, you felt small with your thick Northumbrian accent of a miner. You had to endure grueling cross-examinations where lawyers probed the errors in your field survey. You admitted that you had misestimated the costs and had no certain solution for crossing Chat Moss, a massive bottomless bog lying between the two cities. The lack of academic background and the inability to present fluently before an aristocratic crowd led to your failure. The 1,825 bill was flatly rejected, and you were suspended from your role as chief engineer in a humiliating disgrace. I felt as if I were being tried for the crime of being a self-taught workman. It was a painful contrast between the glory at Stockton and the rejection at the Capitol. Yet, you were not one to easily collapse before political storms. In 1826, after academic engineers like George and John Rennie resurveyed with a standard tone, the bill was passed. But the project owners in Liverpool still knew a truth. Those paper engineers could draw beautiful maps, but they could never build a real line through the treacherous Chat Moss. They needed your hands and practical intellect. You were reappointed as chief engineer in 1826. To the amazement of the London professional world, you returned to the site with high composure and determination, ready to face the bottomless bog with solutions that no textbook had ever written. You understood that the path to the title of Father of the Railways had to be paved with both resilience in the face of failure and the innate talent of one who always listens to the breath of machines. You walk on the wrought iron rails just laid on the outskirts of Manchester, feeling the slight sinking of the ground beneath your feet as a drizzle begins to fall. The smell of damp earth and coal smoke mingle, reminding you of the colossal challenge of Chat Moss waiting ahead. You look toward the distant horizon, where smoke columns from the textile mills are rising. your mind already imagining a new circulatory system that will bring prosperity to this entire land. The sound of construction hammers echoes from afar like an affirmation that, no matter how many barriers from Parliament, the power of steam and human will still find its way. Darkness gradually falls over the mudflats of Lancashire, leaving only the red glow from the locomotives being maintained in the sheds to guide your way home. Part 6. Conquering the Chat Moss Bog for the Railway. You feel the saltiness of the mud and the pungent smell of peat soaking into every fiber of your sleeve as you stand at the edge of a vast void. Before you are not the lush green fields of the English countryside, but Chat Moss, a sleeping monster, a 12-square-mile peat bog, challenging all human ambition. In the 1820s, Britain was burning with the spirit of the Industrial Revolution, and you were at its epicenter. Manchester, the heart of the textile industry, was beating with a frantic pace, producing massive amounts of cloth thanks to the steam engines you understood so well. 40 miles away, the port of Liverpool reached out to receive cotton from across the ocean and sent finished products around the world. Yet, between these two hearts lay a congested circulatory system. The muddy roads and the old Bridgewater Canal system had become overloaded, slow, and expensive. You understood that without a railway connecting these two cities, the growth of the entire empire would be throttled by friction and geographic distance. You recall the tense meetings with the group of Liverpool merchants who had bet their future on your vision. However, this journey was not paved with roses. You faced fierce opposition from the canal tycoons, who held a monopoly and did not want to see any rails threatening their pockets. They did not just use arguments. They hired thugs to attack and drive away your survey teams. Public opinion at the time was also filled with vague fears. Rumors circulated that the speed of the train would cause women to miscarry, or that passengers would suffocate from smoke in the tunnels. Even your failures at Parliament in 1825, where academic lawyers grilled you on measurement errors, remained a scar on your self-esteem. But now, in 1826, after prestigious engineers like the Rennie brothers helped the bill pass on paper, investors turned back to you. They understood that only a practical man like you could turn those flowery drawings into reality amidst the harsh field conditions. The greatest challenge now was Chat Moss. You stand there, looking at the black, slushy mud stretching endlessly to the horizon. In some places, the peat layer was over 9 meters deep, a bottomless pit that had swallowed countless horse carriages and reckless lives. To the civil engineers formerly trained in London academies, Chat Moss was a death sentence for the project. They used soil mechanics, formulas, and theoretical physics to loudly declare that building a railway through here was impossible. They argued that any heavy structure, from the roadbed to multi-ton steam locomotives, would simply sink into nothingness, like a stone falling to the bottom of the ocean. The contrast between the numbers on their papers and the muddy reality beneath your feet was clearer than ever. You had no academic degrees, but you had decades of experience fighting water leaks and subsidence in the mines. You knew that nature never follows mathematics absolutely without the intervention of practical intellect. Your philosophy was simple. Steam locomotives are weak against slopes, so the entire route must be kept as level as possible. To achieve that levelness, you could not go around the bog. You had to drive through its heart. Your confidence did not come from arrogance, but from a grand vision of the future of railways. George Stephenson told me as a young man, that railways would supersede almost all other methods of conveyance in this country, when mail coaches will go by railway and railroads will become the great highway for the king and all his subjects. I know there are great and almost insurmountable difficulties to be encountered, but what I have said will come to pass, as sure as you live." Those words were like a solemn vow, giving you strength as you faced the abyss of Chatmos. You began to completely change the approach to the problem. Instead of trying to dig deep to find hard ground, an impossible and costly task, you decided you would no longer fight the depth of the bog. Instead, you would effectively float the line across it. You sought out Robert Stannard, a bog handling expert from East Anglia, to discuss an unconventional solution together. You realized that if you could distribute the weight over a large enough surface area, the bog would become a support instead of a trap. This idea went against every traditional 19th century construction principle, where people always sought to drive piles deep into the earth. But you, who had spent a lifetime understanding the balance of force and friction, knew that flexibility is sometimes stronger than rigidity. The construction process began with a strange sight never before seen on construction sites. You mobilized hundreds of workers to cut down thousands of branches of heather and wild bushes. The rustling of dry branches being broken and the pungent smell of sap spread across the bogland. You instructed them to weave those branches together into large bundles, creating giant vegetation mats. Imagine thousands of mats made of plants being placed directly onto the slushy mud, layered upon each other to create a floating cushioned surface. Then, you covered this structure with a thick layer of black tar for waterproofing and adhesion, and finally spread a thick layer of crushed stone on top. Every step you took on this new foundation brought a buoyant sensation, but you knew the vegetation cushion was acting like life buoys, keeping the entire system from being punctured and sinking into the deep mud. The period of 1827–1828 became a true war of attrition. Theory was one thing, but the reality at Chatmos was a nightmare of perseverance. On many mornings, you woke up and were shocked to find that tons of material your team had poured the day before had completely vanished, swallowed by the maw of the bog without a trace. You looked at your workers, covered in mud, their eyes showing discouragement as their labor slowly sank. "We must pour more!" you shouted amidst the wind whistling across the empty bogland. You continuously refined the structure, reinforced more layers of heather, and changed the weight distribution of the crushed stone. It was a painful and costly process of trial and error, lasting through many seasons of wind and rain. While you were struggling with every meter of the track, a storm of public opinion surrounded you once again. The academic engineers who had opposed the project now gleefully mocked your failure. They called Chatmos the bottomless pit of the investors and predicted total failure. Even within the board of the Liverpool and Manchester Company, doubt began to surface. They summoned you to meetings, asking tough questions about when the material would stop sinking. You stood there with heavily calloused hands and clothes smelling of peat, facing gentlemen in luxurious suits. You didn't have beautiful charts. You only had an ironclad belief, "I will make it float." The contrast between your composure and their panic was a testament to the mettle of a man who had once delved deep into the earth to understand its power. Your perseverance finally made the bog yield. By 1828, the roadbed began to reach a saturation point and stopped sinking. A flat, solid strip of man-made land gradually took shape amidst the desolate bog. You walked on the newly installed iron rails, feeling the steadiness beneath your boot soles. When the first heavy material wagons passed through this section without making it sink even an inch, you knew you had won. You had proven that practical civil engineering, based on observation and experimentation, could conquer the limits that textbook theories declared impossible. Success at Chat Moss was not just a technical victory. It was a manifesto for the rise of the self-taught working class over the dominance of the academic elite. This victory untied the largest knot on the entire Liverpool-Manchester line. Now, the road connecting the two greatest industrial centers in Britain was clear. Your reputation was no longer confined to the title of mechanic or locomotive builder. You had truly risen to become a great civil engineer. The successful taming of Chat Moss paved the way for the next fateful events: the Rainhill Trials locomotive competition and the inauguration of the world's first intercity railway. You look toward Manchester, where oil lamps begin to flicker in the night, feeling an infinite sense of relief. You turned the impossible into the possible, and by floating a road on mud, you lifted an entire era of transport to a new height. You stop at a recently completed section of the track, leaning down to pick up a stray, dry heather branch on the crushed stone foundation. The smell of damp earth after a Lancashire drizzle softens in the air, giving way to the steady echo of the rails contracting under the cold of the sunset. You stand silently, looking into the distance where the railway runs straight through the conquered bog, your mind already listening to the roar of the next generation of locomotives about to roll on this glorious journey. The pale yellow light from the lanterns of the night shift worker teams begins to move along the line, creating small but steady streaks of light amidst the vast space of Chat Moss, guiding your way home. Part 7. Winning the Rainhill Trials and opening the Liverpool line. The scent of hot grease mingling with the steam rising from the Newcastle workshop is what awakens all your senses in the early hours of 1829. You stand there, hands stained with oil, looking at the technical drawings spread across the wooden table where your son Robert is working tirelessly on every specification of the multi-tubular boiler. Britain at this time is no longer just green fields or dark coal mines, but has become a burning construction site of the Industrial Revolution. Manchester, the heart of textile manufacturing, is beating with a frantic rhythm, producing massive amounts of cloth to supply the whole world. And Liverpool, the bustling seaport, the gateway to global trade, waits day and night for those shipments. Yet, the 40 miles separating the two cities remains a constant worry. Slow canal systems and muddy roads have become bottlenecks, restricting the economic lifeblood of the empire. You know that your mission is not just to connect two cities, but to release the full potential of a new era. To realize the Liverpool and Manchester Railway L&MR project, you face challenges far exceeding any previous civil engineering work. 31 miles of track required absolute levelness, a puzzle demanding you subdue even the most treacherous terrain. You directed the construction of 64 bridges and viaducts, from the majestic Sankey Viaduct to the Skew Bridge at Rainhill, from the towering Olive Mount deep cutting to the Wapping Tunnel, the first tunnel to run beneath a major city. Yet, the most resounding victory remained the subduing of the Chat Moss bog, where you proved that practical faith could float the railway on top of the mud. That steadfastness elevated you to the position of chief engineer of a project that would forever change the face of the planet. You wonder, after Chat Moss, what obstacle of nature could stop these iron wheels? Is the world ready to embrace a speed of travel unprecedented in human history? As the line neared completion, another battle erupted within the board of directors, the battle over motive power. While conservatives still believed in horsepower or stationary engines pulling trains with complex cables, you remained steadfast in your love for traveling steam locomotives. To resolve the dispute, the Rainhill trials in October 1829 were organized as a life-or-death arena for ideas. The £500 prize was a large sum, but the accompanying conditions were truly harsh. The locomotive had to weigh under 6 tons, pull 3 times its own weight at a record speed of 10 miles per hour, and most importantly, it had to consume its own smoke so as not to pollute the air. This was not just a speed contest. It was a competition of endurance, efficiency, and practicality. You look at the list of competitors and know this is the time for your Ann Roberts brainchild to speak. 5 locomotives appeared on the Rainhill track, but the shadow of failure soon enveloped most of the rivals. The cycloped, powered by a horse on a treadmill, was disqualified for violating the mechanical spirit. The Perseverance suffered a malfunction just before starting. The Sanspareil and Novelty, though carrying much hope, revealed their fragility when facing the long-distance challenge. Amidst those heaps of broken iron and steel, your and Robert's rocket emerged as a masterpiece of perfection. Built at the Newcastle Works, the rocket was not just a machine. It was a revolution in multi-tubular boiler design, increasing the heating surface area many times over. You combined a blast pipe to create a powerful air draft and cylinders positioned at an angle to optimize power transmission. Every detail on the rocket was an affirmation of the superiority of practical engineering over empty theories. The rocket's performance at Rainhill became a legend. It not only pulled heavy loads steadily, but also set an astonishing record speed of 36 miles per hour. In that moment, the roar of the steam engine drowned out all voices of doubt. The board of directors was completely convinced. They realized the future did not lie with horses or silent cables, but in the mobile power of steam. This victory granted your company the exclusive right to supply locomotives for the Liverpool-Manchester line, turning the name Stephenson into a symbol of reliability and progress. You stand on the track, feeling the heat radiating from the rocket, and know that you have just opened a door after which the world will never be as slow as before. The contrast between the silence of the defeated rivals and the powerful pulse of the rocket was the overture to a brilliant era. On the 15th of September 1830, the inauguration ceremony of the L and MR line took place under a sun-drenched sky, marking the birth of the first intercity railway in the world. This was a grand event, gathering the most powerful figures in Britain, led by the Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington. You personally operated the Northumbrian, leading the parade, while Robert drove the Phoenix and Joseph Locke drove the Rocket. 8 steam locomotives glistened in the sun, pulling wagons filled with guests of honor and dreams of prosperity. The cheers of tens of thousands of spectators mingled with the train whistles to create an unprecedented festive atmosphere. You feel the weight of history beneath your controls, a surge of pride seeing the fruits of years of labor finally recognized by the world. However, the aura of the inauguration day was overshadowed by an unforeseen tragedy at Parkside Station. When the train stopped to take on water, William Huskisson, the Member of Parliament for Liverpool, stepped down to speak with the Duke of Wellington. Amidst the chaos and lack of experience regarding railway safety at the time, he did not notice the rocket approaching on the adjacent track. Panicked, Huskisson stumbled and fell into Rocket's path. The heavy machine ran over his leg, crushing bone and flesh to the horror of all witnesses. You stand there, stunned, watching the respected MP collapse. The cheering died out, replaced by shrill screams and a somber atmosphere enveloping the ceremony. How could a day of glory end in blood and tears? That question pierced your mind as you rushed to the victim's side. The instinct of a mechanic and an engineer would not allow you to stand still in despair. You immediately took control of the situation, uncoupling the carriage from the Northumbrian and turning it into a high-speed ambulance like never before. You pushed the steam lever to the maximum, rushing Huskisson to find a doctor in the town of Eccles, 15 miles away. In this race against death, the Northumbrian reached a terrifying velocity, having covered the distance in 25 minutes. This was the fastest land travel humans had ever performed up to that point, a painful testament to the power of the invention you had created. However, despite the lightning-fast medical attention, Huskisson died that evening. His death was recorded as the first railway passenger fatality, becoming a sad scar on your Medal of Glory. After the tragedy, voices of opposition rose again, claiming that high speed was proof that railways were dangerous to human life. Yet, the flow of progress was irreversible. The economic efficiency of the Liverpool-Manchester line quickly swept away all doubt. Within weeks, passengers were using the railway in droves, finding that moving between Liverpool and Manchester in hours instead of days was now a reality. Transportation costs were reduced by roughly 80%, reviving industries that were once gasping due to stagnation. You see the profit figures dancing on the ledgers, but more importantly, you see a shrinking world where people and goods can circulate as easily as blood in veins. The circulatory system of industrial Britain had officially been activated, and you were the one who forged its heart. The resounding success of the L&MR triggered a railway mania spreading across the empire and the world. Now, every investor, every city, wanted the presence of the father of the railways. You became a central figure, constantly busy as chief engineer for major projects crossing the Pennines and the North Midlands. Delegations from Belgium, Spain, and even American railway engineers traveled to Newcastle to learn technology from you. You were no longer an uneducated coal mine mechanic. You had become a global consultant, a shaper of the 19th century transport order. You look at the railway network gradually covering the map of Britain, feeling the pulse of a great railway age spreading its heat to every corner of economic and social life. Your life is now one of non-stop travel, long meetings, and dusty construction sites. But in the quietest moments, you often remember the moment the rocket set the record at Rainhill, or the painful second of witnessing Huskisson fall. You understand that progress always comes with high prices, and the engineer's role is to constantly improve to minimize those pains. You look toward the horizon, where the steel ribbons are glistening in the sunset, feeling a powerful urge to continue laying the bricks for the future. You are not just building roads. You are building a new way of human interaction with the world, where space is no longer a barrier and time is measured by the beat of steam. You board the last train of the day as the sunset fades behind the chimneys of Manchester. The sound of iron wheels grinding on the rails creates a steady rhythm, lulling the fatigue after a long day of work on the viaduct construction sites. You lean back into the wooden seat, feeling the gentle vibration of the train gliding through the darkness, carrying plans for even grander railways connecting London and Birmingham. Night falls on the Lancashire fields, leaving only the flickering light from the lanterns of the signalmen along the route to guide your way home. Part 8. Becoming the chief engineer of many major projects. The dawn of the 1830s no longer brought the stillness of the misty Northumberland fields. Instead, it carried the frantic pulse of a nation gripped by fever. Following the resounding success of the Liverpool and Manchester line in 1830, glory was no longer a stranger, but had officially knocked on the door of your life, settling into your home and every breath you took. You found yourself at the center of an unprecedented historical phenomenon called railway mania. Those who previously doubted or mocked your fire-breathing monsters were now the first to kneel before the five. Power of steam, rushing to find funding to build railways across the country. The railway was no longer a risky experiment. It had become a symbol of prosperity, a money-printing machine that every investor yearned to touch. As the man who had realized the impossible, you realized you no longer belonged only to yourself or your family. You had become the property of an entire nation hungry for mobility. You found yourself besieged with requests from railway promoters. Letters piled high on your desk, and invitations from Derby, Leeds, York, and Birmingham poured in continuously. Although the massive workload began to exceed the endurance of a man past the peak of his life, your enthusiasm and fierce belief in the future of railways made you virtually unable to decline offers for additional work. You entered the busiest era of your life, becoming the master engineer, reshaping the entire transport map of Britain. Every morning, you woke up with new blueprints, new topographical surveys, and a heavy responsibility to connect the country's great industrial centers into a unified circulatory system. You wondered, could iron and steel truly erase all geographic distances? Would you have the strength to lay the foundation for the lifeblood of this empire? Between 1831 and 1837, you served as chief engineer for a series of massive and complex projects. The Manchester and Leeds Railway emerged as one of the greatest technical challenges you ever faced. You stood looking at the majestic Pennines, the backbone of England, and understood that to overcome them, you could not simply go around. You designed a great tunnel over 1.5 miles long, an extraordinary technical feat for that time, to pierce the heart of the mountain. The sound of hammers striking rock echoed in the darkness of the tunnel. The smell of gunpowder and the moisture of the earth reminded you of your years working in the mines. But this time, you were not digging for coal. You were digging a path for the future. Every meter of rock conquered was a testament to your iron will against the harshness of nature. Next was the North Midland Railway, a vital transport axis stretching from Derby to Leeds. You spent months on horseback and on foot along the valleys of Yorkshire, observing every river and cliff to chart the optimal route. This work required countless efforts in excavation and the construction of complex civil infrastructure to transport coal and industrial goods at unprecedented speeds. You also directly directed the York and North Midland Railway, the Birmingham and Derby Railway, and the Sheffield and Rotherham Railway. The connection of these lines gradually formed the core of the giant Midland Railway Company later on, allowing for a seamless journey from London to York. To you, railways were no longer isolated lines. They were a circulatory system that would change the entire nation. You remembered what you had told John Dixon. George Stephenson told me as a young man that railways will supersede almost all other methods of conveyance in this country, when mail coaches will go by railway, and railroads will become the great highway for the king and all his subjects. Your design philosophy as a civil engineer was always deeply practical and cautious to the point of conservatism. You understood that early steam locomotives were still very weak against gravity. From hard-earned experience, you noticed that even small inclines greatly reduced the speed of locomotives, and slight declines would have made the primitive brakes nearly useless. Therefore, you always insisted on the principle: railways should be kept as level as possible. You did not hesitate to propose winding designs to avoid steep hillsides, or to demand deep cuttings through rocky hills and the building of towering embankments. You built massive stone viaducts to span valleys, creating roads as straight and level as if drawn with a ruler on the ground. Although these works were far more expensive than what later successors deemed necessary, you believed that stability and safety were the only foundations upon which the railway industry could endure long term. However, life did not consist only of glorious victories. Although you were a genius of practical mechanics who applied his rule of thumb genius, you began to encounter the limits of a self-taught man when facing complex administrative and academic procedures. Your blueprints and plans on paper, which you always undervalued, compared to direct observation on site, often revealed errors. The most painful evidence was the Grand Junction Railway project, connecting Liverpool and Manchester with Birmingham. Sloppy paperwork revealed deficiencies in his survey, causing your reputation to waver before the board of directors. In the southern half of this line, the lack of your theoretical planning was exposed nakedly. As a result, in 1835, you were replaced by your own talented assistant, Joseph Locke. It was a bitter lesson in the contrast between instinctive intellect and the precision of formal training. You realized the world was transitioning into a new phase where numbers on paper carried as much weight as hammer blows on the rail. Throughout this decade, you saw a new generation of talented engineers beginning to assert their names. There was your son, Robert Stephenson, with the academic education you had worked so hard to provide. There was your student, Joseph Locke, with his meticulousness in estimates, and especially Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who carried within him extraordinary artistic and technical ambitions. The academic superiority of the next generation caused you to gradually step back from the technological forefront. You tended to become a reassuring name rather than a cutting-edge technical advisor, aimed more at attracting investment. But you were not sad, for you understood that your mission was to pioneer, and once the path was open, younger people would be the ones to take it further. You smiled as you saw Robert gradually replacing you in important meetings, feeling the natural and proud transition of generations. Despite theoretical criticism, you possessed a systemic vision that few others had: the effort to standardize the rail gauge. You argued consistently for standardization so that trains could run across lines of different companies without switching. Your 4 feet 8 and 5-inch gauge, born from the experience of adjusting curves at the coal mines, became the standard you fiercely defended. It was here that you had a heated clash with Isambard Kingdom Brunel. As your northern railway network and Brunel's western network drew closer, the difference in gauge became a true battlefield. In your first meeting, you questioned Brunel sharply. What business did he have north of the Tyne? Brunel defended his 7-foot wide gauge, believing it provided greater stability and speed. But you understood that practicality and network effects were the deciding factors. Ultimately, your gauge triumphed, becoming the legal standard in Britain and shaping the global railway system. Your reputation now crossed oceans and the English Channel. In the 1830s, you consulted on the development of railways in Belgium and Spain. In 1835, Belgium opened its first railway using locomotives from the Newcastle factory and fully adhering to the standard gauge. Notably, your influence on the United States was immense. The first American railway contractors traveled thousands of miles to Newcastle to learn your methods. The first dozen or so locomotives utilized in the U.S. were purchased from the Stephenson shops. You saw your designs being taken across the world, laying the foundation for the conquest of distant lands with steam and iron. Newcastle had become a hallowed site of engineering, where every engineer in the world wanted to come and study. Alongside glory, massive projects brought you a fortune you never dared dream of in your youth. But you didn't just grow wealthy through engineering fees. You grew wealthy through the eyes of a miner. Tunneling work for the North Midland Railway had revealed unworked coal seams. With innate sharpness, you recognized this immense economic potential immediately. You put much of his money into their exploitation, using capital gain from the railways. You continuously bought land, took over coal mines in Derbyshire, and owned ironworks and limestone quarries. You didn't just build railways, you owned the very energy and materials to maintain them. The combination of engineering and business transformed you into one of the wealthiest and most powerful men of the Victorian era. This period was also when you witnessed the brilliant maturation of Robert. Your theoretical deficiencies were perfectly compensated for by your son's educational background. You two still collaborated closely, with George suggesting improvements and Robert implementing them. As Robert's capabilities grew superior, you proactively stepped back to leave the stage to him. Robert himself directed the surveys for vital lines like the London and Birmingham Railway, completed in 1838. This wise decision to step back was not a surrender to age, but a profound transfer of legacy. You are prepared to enter semi-retirement in wealth and fulfillment, ready to find a peaceful harbor for your final years after having devoted your full strength to the cause of conquering the world with rails. You stand on the balcony of your office, looking down at the trains busily entering and leaving Derby Station. The train whistles echoing in the air like a greeting to the prosperity you helped build. The familiar smell of coal smoke mingles with the taste of success, making you feel an unusual peace amidst the bustling pace. You take a pocket watch from your coat, watching the hands move toward the end of the day, your mind already thinking of the lush green space of Tapton House that you had just set your eyes on. Darkness gradually falls over the construction sites currently at rest, leaving only the red glow from the distant ironworks reflecting against the night sky of the Midlands to guide your way home. Part 9. Purchasing Tapton House and investing in industry. You insert the heavy brass key into the lock of the large oak door at Tapton House, feeling the smoothness of the finely polished metal. The elegant click of the internal mechanism echoes in the stillness of a late afternoon in 1838. You step into the main hall, where the warmth of the fireplace and the scent of sandalwood replace the grease and coal smoke that have pursued you for half a century. The years of enduring rain and sun on construction sites, the sleepless nights spent over steam locomotive blueprints, now seem to recede into a fading memory. You stand there, amidst the vast room with its soaring ceilings and magnificent oil paintings, realizing you are no longer the cow-herding boy from Wylam. The extraordinary ascent through the class system is measured not just by your bank balance, but by your peaceful breath in an estate for the elite. You wonder, could the boy who once received a wage of just 2 pence a day ever imagine becoming the most prominent self-made man of the Victorian era? Those questions dissolve into space, leaving only the belated but brilliant recognition of an age for you. Tapton House was not merely a home. It was a true gentleman's estate, located near Chesterfield, Derbyshire. You walk through the thick carpeted hallways, looking out the window at the vast surrounding gardens, with ancient trees gently swaying in the wind. The contrast is spectacular. From sharing a cramped wattle and daub cottage with only one room for 8 people at Wylam Colliery, you now own a mansion with dozens of luxurious rooms. Proudly owning a magnificent estate like Tapton is the clearest confirmation that the upper class has had to bow in recognition of the talent of a man who was illiterate until the age of 18. You sit down in a comfortable leather armchair, feeling the social acceptance seep into your skin. The title of Father of the Railways is no longer a distant praise. It has become the destiny tied to your name. That name is now a reliable guarantee, a symbol of power that any investor would seek out for collaboration. However, the peak of fame also brought the weight of exhaustion. As you approach the age of 60, you feel the frantic pace of railway projects and the stressful parliamentary hearings have begun to drain your strength. You set a new direction for your life, seeking peace and balance, but the sharp instinct of an engineer and a brilliant businessman within you never truly rests. It was during the direct supervision of tunneling through mountains for the North Midland Railway that your keen eyes discovered massive, unworked coal seams exposed deep within the earth. You look at that shiny black mineral layer and see a new empire. Not missing this golden opportunity, you poured most of your accumulated capital into founding the Clay Cross Company. You began a new journey as a true industrialist. Your Clay Cross Company did not just mine coal. It also produced iron ore and limestone, vital raw materials for building and operating the railway network. You applied a classic strategic mindset, using the railway to drive demand for the mining industry, and using those very mining products to supply the railway construction in return. Your business network was now like a self-contained circulatory system, where every movement brought profit and prosperity. You were no longer just the one laying the bricks for the railway. You had become the provider of the lifeblood for the entire British industrial machine. The transition from a practical mechanic to a powerful mine owner occurred as smoothly as the rolling of a wheel on the wrought iron rails you always cherished. At Tapton House, you found a new passion that was deeply mundane, yet technical: gardening. You did not approach plants like an amateur, taking it up as a common hobby. You brought the experimental mindset of a mechanical engineer to every soil bed and every branch. You invested in building extremely complex greenhouses, where temperature and humidity were strictly controlled, like steam pressure in a locomotive boiler. You grew rare tropical fruits like pineapples and grapes, right in the heart of cold Derbyshire. You experimented with diverse farming techniques, mixing soil types according to complex formulas to achieve optimal growth performance. To you, every ripe pineapple in the greenhouse was a successful engineering feat, a testament that human intellect could control even wild nature. Your obsession with perfection was also shown through a strange and somewhat humorous invention: glass cucumber straighteners. You could not accept that cucumbers grew naturally curved. You requested that your glass factories produce specialized long tubes to force the cucumbers to grow in an absolutely straight line. The fierce rivalry in your blood still burned, leading to a not-too-friendly rivalry with Joseph Paxton, the prestigious gardening expert at the nearby Chatsworth estate. You were immensely proud and gleeful when you defeated this professional expert twice in local horticultural competitions. This detail shows that, whether on a massive construction site or in a peaceful home garden, the fire of desire to conquer and exceed all limits always flowed within you. Your reputation in this period truly reached a global scale. Newcastle and Tapton House became destinations for railway promoters and excellent engineers from across Europe and America. You welcomed delegations who traveled thousands of miles just to hear professional advice from the king of railways. The first steam locomotives to operate in the United States bore the mark of your workshop, and your standard designs became the foundation shaping the American railway industry. You transitioned gradually into the role of a high-level consultant, providing sharp advice for the development of transport systems in Belgium and Spain. You felt your stature was no longer confined to a single mine or a single line. You had become the architect of a new world order. While your health began to show signs of decline, you decided to carry out a historic transfer of power. You stepped back to let your only son, Robert Stephenson, rise to take over key projects. You look at Robert, who is now a great engineer on a global scale with infinite pride. Robert did not just inherit your estate, but elevated it with academic education and sophistication. Letting Robert completely take over the Robert Stephenson and Company was a wise strategic move, ensuring the family legacy would continue to dominate the industry for generations. You also spent time supporting mechanics institutes, training a team of young engineers, passing on to them not only knowledge, but also the fire of perseverance and integrity that you had maintained throughout your life. Amidst those brilliant glories, life gave you ultimate pain in 1845. Your dear wife, Betty Hindmarsh, the solid foundation and soulmate who had been by your side for 25 years, passed away. You remember the difficult years when Betty managed the family so you could peacefully travel to construction sites. She understood your fierce ambitions when the whole world was still skeptical. Her departure left a vast void in Tapton House, making the long hallways seem more hollow and cold than ever. You found yourself a widower for the second time at the age of 64, a profound loneliness enveloping your final years. This loss, combined with gradually failing health, prompted you to retreat into almost complete seclusion. You spent more time in the glass garden, seeking solace from the blossoming green shoots, resting after a life full of storms and glory. Although you had become a millionaire, you never forgot your poor roots. Your humanitarian values and moral standards are clearly shown as you set aside a large portion of your personal fortune for long-term financial support for the widows and families of workers who, unfortunately, died while working under you. In Victorian society, when social security networks were completely absent, this action of yours was extremely rare and noble. You understood the price of every ton of coal and every mile of track was the sweat and even the blood of laborers. That compassion was the highest medal you awarded yourself, a profound tribute to those who had accompanied you from the darkness of the mines into the light of prosperity. You walk slowly along the gravel path in the garden of Tapton House, feeling the moisture of the afternoon mist gradually falling on the grape leaves in the greenhouse. The wind blowing through the ancient trees sounds steadily like the breath of the Derbyshire land, bringing you back to quiet reflections after a long day of caring for rare pineapples. You look into the distance, where the flickering lights of the town of Chesterfield begin to appear in the blur, feeling a complete relaxation knowing that all your legacy has been placed in worthy hands. Darkness covers the warm reading room, as you gently close the technical book you were half reading, leaving only the dim light from the last coal fires in the mansion to guide your way back to peaceful sleep. Part 10. President of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers and Death. You stand in the brightly lit hall of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers on an evening in 1847, feeling the warmth of the belated but greatest recognition enveloping you. In your refined aristocratic suit, you look down at your hands that still bear faint scars from your time as a fireman and calluses from days of dismantling steam engines in the darkness of the mines. You, a man who did not know his letters until age 18, now stand as the first president of the nation's most prestigious engineering organization. This contrast is staggering, like a miracle of the industrial age, rising from the shadows of illiteracy and poverty to the heights of intellect and power. You hear the thunderous applause of young engineers who look at you not just as a president, but as a living saint of the railway industry. The disdain and condescension from the civil engineers in London, those who worshipped textbook theory and looked down on a practical man like you, has now given way to absolute respect. Heading this organization is not just a personal glory, it is a revolution in mindset. You have formalized what you practiced your whole life, asserting that mechanical engineering is a noble, independent, and creative profession. In your inaugural address, your Northumbrian voice rings out powerfully, emphasizing the core importance of practical knowledge over academic training. You wonder, could dry mathematical formulas on paper ever compare to the feeling of touching a vibrating steam valve? Are academic theories worth the persistence of thousands of trials and errors in dark minds? You smile, for you know that practical hammer blows forged the circulatory system of industrial Britain, not lines of ink on a page. Leaving the bright lights of the institution, you return to the magnificent stillness of Tapton House. In 1838, when you purchased this estate, you placed the final seal on your life's transformation from a wretched cottage in Wylam to a gentleman's estate. Now, in the twilight of your years, you enjoy a regal semi-retirement. You no longer directly supervise deep cuttings through rocky hills, but the intellect of an engineer within you never stops moving. You look at the vast fortune accumulated from coal, iron ore, and limestone mines, gifts you keenly discovered while tunneling for railways, and feel the fulfillment of a successful industrialist. You use the railway to create demand, and used your own mineral mines to meet that demand. A perfect financial loop was established, granting you the freedom to pursue your purest passions. At Tapton House, you transform complex hothouses into a massive agricultural laboratory. You do not garden like an amateur gentleman, you garden like a mechanical engineer, fine-tuning a steam engine. You experiment with every level of humidity, every degree of temperature, and every soil mixture to force rare tropical fruits like pineapples and grapes to grow according to your will. And perhaps the strangest expression of your technical mindset is your obsession with cucumbers. You cannot endure their natural curvature. You invented glass cucumber straighteners to force them to grow in a perfectly straight line. Those straight cucumbers are an affirmation that even nature must submit to the discipline and precision of George Stephenson. The fierce rivalry in your blood still burns as you face off against Joseph Paxton, the most prestigious gardening expert in all of England, at the neighboring Chatsworth estate. It was not too friendly a rivalry, where you used the meticulous observation and unyielding spirit of a mechanic to defeat this professional expert twice in local horticultural competitions. You feel a surge of pride, no less than the moment the rocket locomotive won at Rainhill. To you, everything in this life, whether steel or leaves, can be optimized if one has enough persistence and practical understanding. You stand amidst your lush green garden, smelling damp earth mingled with the scent of new glass, feeling the harmony between man and the world you helped reshape. Yet, amidst these glories, a somber note arrived when your dear wife, Betty Hindmarsh, passed away in 1845. 25 years of devoted companionship, she was the one who understood your every breath, the most solid foundation during the years you traveled across the country to lay the first rails. Her departure left a vast void in the long hallways of Tapton House, making the late afternoons strangely lonely. Unable to endure the solitude, on the 11th of January 1848, you decided to marry for the third time to Ellen Gregory, the housekeeper who had devotedly cared for you at the mansion. This late marriage was your final effort to seek companionship and the warmth of a family home in your final years. You take Ellen's hand, feeling the warmth of peace, though deep down you know the sunset of life is gradually fading. In the summer of 1848, a sharp pain in your chest and fevers began to torment you. Pleurisy attacked a body already worn down by decades of harsh labor. Your lungs, which had breathed in tons of toxic coal dust since age 10 inches the shafts, and smoke from the first steam locomotives, no longer had the strength to fight this severe infection. You lie in your luxurious bed at Tapton House, listening to your own heavy breathing and remembering days of shoveling coal in damp mine shafts. You feel the price of progress, the price of the miles of railway that have stretched across the country. Everything seems to be blurring, leaving only the ticking of the wall clock and Ellen's warmth beside you. At noon, on the 12th of August, 1848, you breathe your last breath at the age of 67, leaving behind a world forever changed by your hands. Your remains are taken to Holy Trinity Church in the town of Chesterfield, laid to rest right beside your second wife, Betty Hindmarsh. The funeral takes place modestly, true to the simple nature of a man who always valued practical worth over outward praise. A simple floor slab marked only with initials and the year of death, 1848, is all that marks the resting place of the father of the railways. Yet, the modesty of the grave cannot obscure the greatness of the man beneath. News of your passing spreads like an electric current through the engineering community and major newspapers worldwide. Even the experts who once harshly criticized you must bow in acknowledgement that your departure is the end of a great era, where a single individual used a will of steel to pull humanity into a future of speed and mobility. In the final lines of your will, you revealed a vast humanitarian heart that few tycoons possess. You never forgot your impoverished roots. You established long-term financial support funds specifically for the widows and orphans of workers who died while working under you. In a cruel Victorian society, where the death of a breadwinner often meant the destruction of an entire family, your action was a warm light of unprecedented moral standards. You understood that your success was built on the blood and sweat of anonymous laborers, and protecting them was the final sacred duty you had to perform. That compassionate heart is your invisible but most precious legacy, proving that even though you became a millionaire, your heart always belonged to the mining class from which you were born. The transfer of power to Robert Stephenson took place most brilliantly and completely. The son you spent a lifetime investing in education for is now a great engineer on a global scale. Robert takes over the family's massive engineering empire, bringing locomotives named Stephenson to 6 continents. Although Robert built complex truss bridges far beyond your vision, your son always humbly speaks of the practical lessons you taught during late nights at the coal mine. Your legacy is not just machinery, but a new generation of engineers carrying the combination of academic theory and practical sharpness. Robert stands before your grave, feeling the weight of responsibility and infinite gratitude toward the father who opened the iron and steel path for an entire civilization. But perhaps your most eternal legacy is the 4 feet 8.5 inches standard gauge. A pragmatic decision made initially so wheels would not jam in curves has now become the genetic code of global transport infrastructure. About 60% of the world's railway networks today still operate on exactly the dimensions you set. You have permanently unified the space and time of humanity. The prophecy you told John Dixon years ago has been fully realized. Railways have replaced all other modes of transport and become the great highway for everyone. Your journey from an illiterate, impoverished cowherd to the architect of the railway age is the most brilliant epic of human power. You smile faintly in your mind as you see the steam trains still tirelessly rolling on wrought iron rails, shimmering under the moonlight. The train whistles echo through valleys and meadows, carrying the breath of an era where space is no longer a barrier and time is measured by the beat of steam. You feel an ultimate relief as the burden of a life of creation is set down, giving way to eternal stillness in the heart of the Mother Earth of Chesterfield. Gentle darkness envelops the space of Holy Trinity Church as the final rays of the day fade away, leaving only the solemn silence of stone and steel to guide your way back to eternal sleep. Conclusion. George Stephenson, Sleep Upon Eternal Rails. No need for noise, no need to prove anything further. Can you see? The blurred light by the window of Tapton House is now but a fragile outline between dream and reality. The great engineer you have accompanied from a cow-herding child in the dark, until he became the sovereign of industry, building a glorious railway dynasty, has now receded like a thin wisp of smoke from the chimney of a locomotive long ago. George Stephenson has completed his mission on this earth, leaving behind a great legacy, the standard gauge that has connected all geographical distances. But what remains most deeply in your chest right now is the warm feeling of the notion that, if you live kindly, persevere, and always know how to cherish the struggling laborers, you can still leave something memorable for posterity. The bell from a distant church in Chesterfield rings out gently, like a leaf falling onto the still waters of the conquered Chat Moss Bog. George Stephenson has found eternal peace, and so have you. Let the fatigue of the long day quietly drift away with the steady, rhythmic thumping of the memory trains. Take one more deep breath. Feel the warmth of peace enveloping the room. Close your eyes and let all you have heard today guide you into a deep sleep. The night is deep, and the rails leading to dreams are waiting for you.